kind of talked about how they want to see this core marinate and play together. Are you under that opinion that they should just kind of play it out and see how this core does develop, or are you more under the impression that like with the East kind of being where it's at, maybe it's a good time to try to make more of an upgrade to the roster to get Cade some help, because you look at these box scores, the guy's almost playing 40 minutes a night.
Yeah, and it's a really high scoring volume and responsibility that he has at the moment as well. That I feel like it depends. Honestly, this whole question depends on what you view their core as,
Yeah.
right? Because their core isn't obviously the entire team. To me, I look at the core and I see Cade, obviously. I see Jalen Duren, of course, Asar Thompson, Isaiah Stewart, and then I would put Ron Holland in that mix. I think Jaden Ivey is obviously an important piece for the Pistons, but there's so much that remains to be seen with him, especially given his contract status as well, that I don't know if you would say like he is a fixture in the core of this team at the moment, especially because he hasn't, and it's not to any fault of his own, but he hasn't played with this team, much at all last year. And then now coming into this season, he's just, starting to get on the court. I think that ultimately, like changes what you view their core at. Like if you view their core as, what I had previously labeled, then I mean, I don't know what more you really need to see, like I think, what would complement their game. But if you're including Ivy in that and you want to see Cade and Ivy play more together, I think that's completely understandable. They haven't played much together at all. In the minutes they've played together so far this season, I think Ivy's still getting his feet under him. So it's kind of hard to evaluate really where he's at. But I think it's a thing of you are the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, right?
Yeah.
And we are 20 games into the season, so we're not at the midway point, but we're starting to make a little bit of a dent into the season, and you're seeing that you're at the top of your conference, and you can also see kind of what the weaknesses are in your team as well. How you choose to aid those weaknesses ultimately, I think, changes the trajectory of this team. I think, staying at 1-2 is obviously ideal. But if you want to stay there throughout the course of the season, you have to kind of supplement Cade scoring in some way. Now, could that be Jaden Ivey getting his feet under him and playing to the level of, that 5-game stretch that we saw prior to his injury last year? 100%. That's a possibility. But could that also be going out and bringing in a Lauri Markkanen or bringing in a Trey Murphy or, someone like that, a Kobe White, that we just mentioned. I think that's also very much a possibility. I think it's a thing you definitely want to keep an eye on, but I don't know. You don't want to run Cade to the ground, like you don't want his tires to just keep spinning on this type of load throughout the season, because you need him healthy for the playoffs. And especially if your plan is to roll with the same team, keep it going. He's going to be your number one option in the playoffs regardless. Right. But especially if you don't make any move and, the Pistons stay exactly where they are, he's going to be pretty much the primary reason that you score, right? And you have your offense going in a playoff setting, and he's going to get targeted a lot. So that's also a thing that you have to look at in terms of, do you make a trade or not? Is because is this offense able to sustain Cade getting doubled and passing out and looking for guys to score outside of him? Because the 3-point shooting right now is also a really big struggle. You don't have Tim Hardaway and Malik Beasley. You have Duncan Robinson, which is great. And you've seen some really good minutes from Chaz Lanier, but he's not a permanent fixture in this rotation either. So, it's just kind of figuring out what exactly makes this team that championship level contender, because I think that's ultimately the discussion that needs to be had right now. And that's where the team kind of has to have these internal dialogues about is what brings us to the NBA Finals, because that's the kind of trajectory that they're heading towards in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, like I can understand if Trajan wants to just play it safe and have internal development. I could 100% respect that because he hasn't drafted these guys. There's contract negotiations that will probably be ongoing this summer if you don't move either Duran or Ivy, which I don't really think they're going to move Duran, but I feel like Ivy is the one player that a lot of people bring up, and I can understand it from a contract standpoint. But I think the talent is just it's there. It's just we haven't seen it consistently, whether that's due to injuries or due to former coaches not playing him. But I mean, I think what you said is really important about Cade because like he's playing 38, 40 minutes a night, shooting probably more than he wants to. The number 2 option, it might get annoying to Pistons fans, but when you get into playoff series, you're going to need another player to, take over games. Like someone had mentioned Jalen Williams in the chat. And, we had a 40-point outburst during the NBA Finals, and he was always in question. Could he be the number 2 option? OKC kind of had a patient approach, and he developed into a number 2 option, but their number 2 option hasn't played this year, and OKC's out to a 17-1 start, but that says more about their depth and their coaching and the draft picks that they found in the draft and finding late round gems like a AJ Mitchell in the second round. But I mean, I think the Pistons approach, they can go in a lot of different ways. It just depends how they want to build long term or if they want to build in the short term. I'd like to think that they want to build in a long term success, but if you can upgrade marginally, I think Trajan has shown that he likes to do that, especially adding Dennis Schroeder last year, which was a very marginal move. It was a big move, kind of given like the backup point guard market at the time because he was probably the best backup point guard you could get, and you got him for basically a second round pick. So I think this team has different needs this year than it did last year. Last year was backup point guard. This year, I think it's more consistent 3-point shooting because I don't really think that if you go into a playoff series, Duncan Robinson will be getting run off the 3-point line. Teams will be blitzing Cade Cunningham if you get into a playoff series. So trying to find that number 2 option as the season goes on, whether it's, Asar taking a leap, Tobias being a steady veteran that he is, or Jaden Ivey, once his minute restriction gets lifted and he gets a little bit more consistent minutes, maybe he can take that second option. I think those are just all storylines that we'd be paying attention to. And that's why so many people have just kind of just hammered of trying to find a number 2 next to Cade, because right now, the way he's playing, come playoff time, the guy's going to be gassed.
Yeah. I mean, it worked to an extent last year where Malik Beasley was that kind of volume 3-point shooter where he had one of the greatest 3-point shooting seasons of all time. And then Tobias was fully healthy throughout the season. And I thought he played incredible in that Knicks series as well. But when you look at this team's, roster construction, it's not necessarily 1-for-1 like how it was last year. And I think inevitably there will have to be some kind of move that gets made that not necessarily even for the sake of the regular season, but for the playoffs themselves, that makes it easier for this team to kind of get into a rhythm offensively. And I think that's like the biggest thing. Obviously, defense isn't really much of a question on this team as to what effort they'll give and what that identity looks like, especially even in a playoff series. But I feel like that scoring is a big question mark. And like you said, Duncan Robinson is going to 100% get targeted because everybody knows that is the Pistons. Like, honestly, like that is the majority of their 3-point volume comes from Duncan, right? Or just his gravity alone, like brings a lot of attention. So I feel like, let's say you don't go out and make that big swing. What does Kobe White cost? Does his 3-point shooting and scoring alleviate that pressure off of Cade and Duncan? I think yes. Like you look at moves like that, or you look at someone like maybe even kind of on the Dennis Schroeder kind of level, where the Pistons were able to go out and acquire him last year for relatively cheap. I don't think he'll be as cheap as Dennis Schroeder, but in terms of name value and not necessarily really being that big swing, but like maybe like a Royce O'Neal in Phoenix, like somebody like that, somebody who kind of knows their role and is able to kind of fill a hole that the Pistons have.